What's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul, Liberty Hill Comics. Welcome to the show. Episode 47, the Comic Book Conservators. Whew, we did it. We got through another week. We got through another month. And here we are. How are y'all doing?
Oh, man. If I was any better, I wouldn't know what to do with myself.
Not as colorful as your normal non-sequiturs,
but
but
that was a tame one. I didn't have a chance to come up with a good one for today, so
What's it?
Captain,
busy, blah 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 blah.
Okay.
There we go. All right,
Captain,
you got my attention now.
Oh my goodness gracious. What a start to the show. Shelby's playing on his phone. Captain Leary is under the weather. So
Larry's sick. He said his German girlfriend is taking care of him. He can't talk, and she's feeding him soup in bed.
Oh.
Well,
nice.
Hopefully
wish him a speedy recovery.
He gets better soon. That's one of the hazards of traveling so much. Jason, thank you so much for the super chat. Everybody, check out Archivist Adrift here on YouTube. You're going to have fun. That's our buddy Jason Adrift. Actually, incredibly, one of the sponsors of today's show. He and Salesboy Comics both had super chats last episode, which was 2 weeks ago. So if you are watching this show live and you're watching it without ads, thank them, please. Give them a round of applause. Maybe buy them around the next time you see them in the bar. And we appreciate you, gentlemen. Thanks again. Shelby, let everybody know where they can find you.
You can find me right here if you're checking me out on the simulcast on my chan, Shelby's Comics. And I haven't been dropping any videos in a while. I was just thinking about that today, that I need to get myself back there and start doing some conservation work. But you can also find me over on our Facebook group at the Comic Book Conservation. Jack, I don't need your tail in my tea. Oh my God. You can also find me at the Comic Book Conservation Facebook group. I was just answering some questions today from some people over there about I don't remember what about, but I'm always available on Messenger over there, and always happy to help out. So yes, and you can find me at any reputable truck stop in the South Texas area. Just look for, never mind.
That was.
Do we have to visit the restroom? And is there a secret knock or something?
Anyway.
Phil, say hi to everybody.
Hey, here, Phil here, co-hosting as mostly always with Dr. Paul. Coming to you live from the border of Brooklyn and Queens here in New York City, same as one of our favorite web slingers, Spider-Man. Whenever I think of Queens and a superhero, you gotta think of Spider-Man. I can't not. But you can find me on Instagram at Phantom Restoration or at this lovely website right underneath my name. And yeah, great to happy to be here as always.
Jack.
I think of Queens. I think of one of my heroes, DMC.
Oh, okay.
It's in the place to be. How's everyone done? It's been a couple weeks. We've had a lot going on. Glad we're back. But I was out last week, as was Larry. 2 weeks ago, we were traveling. It's been a little hectic. It's been a little chaotic.
Oh.
It's nice to be back. Looks like a lot of our friends stuck around despite our not being around. Let's say hi to everybody. Hugo Dammer's here. Hey, Mike. Glad to
I
hear
know
you got
you're
that art
excited.
finally. I was a little worried. I'm not gonna lie. Spending money on art in Brazil and hoping it shows up was I don't know, a little more risk than I would take myself, but I'm glad to hear you got it. Collecting Chaos is here. Thank you. Welcome. AG is here. Hello. Rick Nestor's here. G. Skavorak's here. JCP is here. Ben Stewart's here. The aforementioned Jason Adrift, Rick Nestor, Silver Spidey, Don Carter, the Professor. Check out this channel, Experiments in Conservation. Collecting Chaos is here. Welcome. Pausing Doctor Who to join us. We appreciate that. Gerald Yates says, "What up, party people?" Vulu's here. And
Lulu's in Houston. I didn't know that. Or maybe I did know
sweet.
that. But yes, we're not neighbors though. He lives like probably, even though we're both in Houston, he's probably about 80 miles from me.
Good Lord. That's wild. So we have one long segment today. We'll break it up a little bit, but it's such a fun book, such an important book. It's had such a journey that I thought we would talk about its journey as much as we could piece together anyway. And we can pause a few times along the way to check in with our viewers and get some updates on some things. I know Shelby's new best friends with the postmaster over there because he's been shipping books to backers for our Kickstarter. So let's get started. What do you guys say?
Let's go.
Look at this book. Wow.
That thing's had it.
Yeah, it's been through the ringer, but it's still here, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
Almost looks like an Ashcan copy almost.
Right?
Man, this thing's
Number 10.
seen
Man, there's
better
not
days.
even any reds left in it. Oh my gosh.
I titled this "Rescued from Oblivion," and let's jump right in. So, firstly, why should we care? So, Action Comics, obviously, I don't know, the most important comic book ever published. Action 1, arguably. I mean, I think there's not much of an argument against it. Superman's on the cover, which is brilliant because it's an anthology, so it features a bunch of stories. Superman sneaking onto the cover was not a foregone conclusion. So I think that was good happenstance. But you'll notice it also was a slow burn, right? So Action 2, Action 3, 4, 5, 6, no Superman on the cover. 7 is the second Superman cover. Action 8, Action 9, no Superman. 10 is the next Superman cover.
I've been the third cover appearance as Superman.
Yeah. And then we get odd numbers, 11, 13, 15, 17, and 19. And then Superman is just so clearly the one holding down the title that Superman's on every cover after that. Action's published well over 1,000 issues. You know, they restarted it a few times, but they go back to the legacy counting from time to time. I don't know. What do you guys want to say about Action? I mean, clearly one of the most important titles of all time. Number one of the most important issues of all time. We'll get into 7 and 10 in a little bit more depth in a moment, but just generally Action Comics, especially in this period, it's called the Golden Age for a reason. I mean, it was just brilliant. And these early Simon and Schuster Superman stories are phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, I would hold a close candle to Detective 1 since it was published before Action. Technically, that's where DC got its namesake from. But
Of course.
arguably, Action 1 is the most iconic cover of all time. So you got to give Superman his due. And this copy, issue 10, is no joke. You know, the third appearance, I think for some people, they're like, well, it's not the first or second, but to put it into perspective, good luck getting an entry level Action 1. And Action 7 already is going to be not in the same caliber, but you're talking, up there. So a 10 is.
Oh yeah.
These are rare books.
You're making a decision between that chunk of paper or a car.
Like Action 10 was probably on newsstands right at the end of 38. Or right at the beginning of 39. I mean, that is early for comic books. That's really early. So.
Super early.
Yeah.
So,
and to me, that's the importance of it, right? Is that this is the dawn of the Superman or superhero, right? And it's going to be a little while later before we really start, getting into Batman and then everybody else, right? So I think that Superman doesn't hold as large of importance to modern day people as maybe we did when we were kids. Paul, because that was the, oh my God, Action Comics #1, Superman. I mean, I think Batman has definitely usurped him in terms of desirability of comic books.
Yeah, when we were younger, there was a big gap between Action 1 and Tech 27. Now I think there's barely sunlight between the two of them, right? I think Action 1 is still gonna command more than a Tech 27 incomparable, but it's very close now.
Very close.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And speaking of just the history and where these books were, where these heroes were, one of the things about Detective 1 is it's still kind of pulpy, right? And it's not really a superhero title. Action 1 in a lot of ways is also still kind of pulpy. In the pulps, you already had the Man of Bronze, right? The Man of Bronze was Doc Savage, of course. So he predates Superman. These concepts were not brand new. They were just presented in a way that was fresh and that had staying power and that connected with the popular culture at the time and still do. So to give you a sense for how important it is that Superman's on the cover.
Wow.
Here are the
I didn't
covers.
know there's this much of a disparity between the prices of these. Even though Superman's on the inside, right? He's still the main
Of course. Yeah.
story
Superman
on the inside.
Absolutely.
Cover-driven market.
Yep.
That's it.
Tech 6 last sale in 0.5, $850. Tech 7 last sale in 0.5, over 10 grand.
Yep.
0.5 people. That means you're missing half the cover, or you're missing up to half the leaves in the interior. It's a rough book. 10 grand. And then Action 8, so this is the 8th Superman story. Here we go. 0.5 is worth $680. So Superman being on the cover, this of course is the second cover, and the reason why I'm showing values here is to just emphasize we're about to jump into we're about to jump into his third cover, which is Action number 10. But just to show that these early Superman covers are some of the most desirable comic books in the world.
It's nice to lay it out just like you did there. And that's one of my arguments going forward for most, even titles like this where Superman is, again, Shelby, as you said, inside. We're only going to see this disparity get greater over time, probably. And if you look at kind of more esoteric, Vault of Horror, not long ago, if you look at Shock Suspense 22, the famous decapitation cover, that wasn't that now the price is just like this versus corresponding issues, but it was only within the last decade that's really happened. And really, that's kind of crazy when you think about it, but we're in such a cover driven market now. That's just only going to happen more and more and more. And so, they're desirable, but everyone wants the best ones. And here you want Superman on the cover. Sorry, Jimmy Olsen, and sorry, look, books now are
Big books are mostly slabbed. Once they're slabbed, you're not thumbing through it anymore.
Yeah.
You want to show off the cover. You know, if you want to have friends over and say, "Look at my Action 8," and it's slabbed, they go, "Okay, who cares?" Right?
Yeah.
Well, this is the 8th story of Superman. It doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
So 100% and 100% true for the movement in pre-code horror as well.
Yeah. Even though
so cover driven now.
Well, even though the cover, like someone just said in the chat, Jason, that cover 8 is freaking awesome. I mean, their legs intertwined there. I mean, just the lighting and stuff.
Is it
killer ass cover?
Craig Feisel? Is it a Feisel?
Yeah, Fussell.
Fussell,
I mean, it is crazy though. If you look at a Funny Animals book from the same time period or something, right? Like, or like a more fun where there isn't really much going on. 680 is still
not much going on
healthy,
yet.
but that's still a healthy price. But really, it just seems cheap in comparison to the 7. But really, 850 and 680 for some comic books where there's no superheroes on the cover. They're from the flagship title. That's still, when you think about it, you know, it's not. It would be one thing if they were like $250 or something each. Then
sure,
what's going on?
Absolutely.
No, you're
decent
right.
Prices.
Yeah.
Morris Devereaux, welcome. Gorilla Todd, welcome.
Hey, Todd, that's my buddy from Las Vegas. He's opening his store, I think, this weekend in Vegas. So go check it out, Gorilla Todd.
Good luck.
In Vegas, if you're in that area and you can get away from the buffets and the girls.
Yeah,
and
good luck. Absolutely. So Action 10 is what we're talking about today. March of 1939. 3rd Superman cover, as we mentioned. The splash page for this book is actually what was used on the cover of Superman #1. Median grade here 3.0 with only 22 universal. That's about half the books in the census for Action 1. What do we think of that? Do we think there are just as many out there, but fewer slapped? Or do we think this is literally a rarer book than Action 1? I tend to think it's a rarer book.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, Action did go to a second print, right? Action 1. They do tend to print more of first issues. So I think this is genuinely rarer than Action 1, which is wild to think of. 22 universal, 19 restored, 1 qualified, 4 conserved. And for such an important book, for such an early book, 3rd cover of Superman, splash used in Superman 1. Wow. If 1 comes along, I guess you sort of have to pay what you have to pay. Speaking of having to pay what you had to pay.
Oof, yeah.
Where did this book come from?
Seeing it labeled out here makes it.
So this book belonged to a collector. It was sent to a fellow by the name of Michael DeChellis, who many of you may know as the sole proprietor of Hero Restoration, formerly, I suppose. Yeah. A lot has been written about this. A lot has been said on the internet. Honestly, this is not the sort of thing I spend a lot of time on. I didn't do a super deep dive. I do know that this individual was considered kind of a pillar of our community for a very long time.
Yep.
Fell behind with folks, stopped returning messages, took payment up front on a bunch of jobs, and then shut down his business and absconded with everyone's books and their cash.
Yep.
And I don't even have to say allegedly, because he was found guilty of doing all these things. He was arrested in August of 2024. All of the comic books in his possession were seized as evidence at that time. There was a trial, and he was sentenced. So this is our first mugshot on the show. He was sentenced to over 6 years in just 2 months ago, really.
Yep.
a little bit over 2 months ago. Many of the victims still don't have resolution. They still don't have their books back. They don't have their cash back. There's a separate sort of court event to sort all that out. But he's been found guilty of these crimes, and he's been locked away. So
that is a picture of shame for sure.
there were a couple of other even sadder pictures of him.
Before
So-
that happened, though.
Well, like I said, yeah, he was considered a pillar of our community for a long time. And, you know, honestly, life is replete with stories like that. I know somebody who was in the collectible car business who had, prior to the kind of the Great Recession, had been buying and selling cars from an individual for decades, always trustworthy, on a handshake. They would take cars, they would wire money and then just say, send us the titles later. But
Hey, I had an ex-girlfriend steal over $2,000 worth of comic books from me once. So
people get under financial distress, and they do things that they wouldn't do in good times. Now, for me, I think that actually reveals their character personally. But sometimes, you know, if they never get in financial distress, it would never even be exposed. Nevertheless, Michael, according to Kenny Sanderson, Michael himself, the convict here, sent 2 comic books that belonged to a client to Kenny. That client was also a client of Kenny's and a long time, you know, known entity, was apparently communicating with them and sort of got Michael to ship an Action 7 and an Action 10 to Kenny before all of his assets were seized and he was thrown in jail.
I could fill in one of the blanks there. There was a guy, Eddie, who I'll just say his first name. Anyone that got books back owe a great debt to him, because he did a ton of legwork in talking with Mike, because he had a prior relationship with Mike where he was helping do his website for payment for work on his TOS 39. And I was in communication with him at that time and have a package still in my office that was back postmarked from Mike before he got arrested, because I got sent a couple of books as well as Kenny. So I think what happened was there was that main guy, Eddie, but then Kenny ended up also having communication with the police that were dealing with Mike.
It's super unfortunate. I mean, as Mike's side of the story goes, he got swamped during the pandemic. He hired a whole bunch of people, got way behind. And then, of course, during the collapse, couldn't keep all the people on, let them all go. Probably was embarrassed that he wasn't getting work done in a timely fashion, and maybe turned to substance abuse. But regardless, like I said, officially closed his business and absconded with all the books. I mean, that's pretty black and white right there. He also listed several of them for sale on eBay.
I think one part of it too, in relation to this book here, is that just like an important point is that we have pictures of what this book looked like prior to it being sent to Mike. And this detailed what some other people on the boards talked about, that this was something that you could see from the get-go, because I also have a Flash Comics 1 that I'll post in the near future, where we have pictures of it before just like this. And the story that's very obvious is that Mike took these books in and he got in over his head, did work, and then was like, holy crap, messed some stuff up and was like, how am I going to fix this? And then was like, he made a whole can of worms, and then it became a whole issue that he had to try to solve, which was going to be basically impossible to do. So, you know, the Flash Comics 1 that I have, the guy said Mike had for 6 years, which means, you know, this had been ongoing long before health issues or getting in, you know. Unfortunately,
So to your point, the image on the left, sorry, just before we move on, the image on the left is the book according to the owner as it was sent to Michael. The image on the right is the book according to Kenny as he received it from Michael. So,
Crazy.
yeah, go ahead, Shelby.
Nuts.
Yeah.
How do you even do that much damage to a book? I mean, there's like pieces missing now, and
Yep.
I mean,
Well, so here's something interesting. Kenny mentioned that both of these, the 7 and the Action 7 and the Action 10, were both purchased off of Heritage, and that the purchase price was over 40 grand, plus the owner paid Mike upfront cash. But I'll say this, Kenny provided a full image of the 7 with the CGC label. I looked through all of Heritage history of sales, and I couldn't find it there. It was restored. I'm thinking, Shelby, to answer your question, maybe this number 10 is restored. So maybe
that's what I'm wondering. Yeah,
maybe after Aqueous Bath, these pieces missing are the chunks that maybe were piece fill or something like that. Not clear to me. I don't know the answer, but there's a clue potentially to it right there.
And you can tell
This
the same
much-
book because you can match up
Oh,
some of the
yeah.
tears.
It's obviously the same book.
Yeah, you can match up some of the tears. You can match up there around the March, the 3rd or 4th tear, which
The stain in the 64 pages
Yeah,
bubble.
you can
There's
match
enough
it up,
things.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's we've shown, I think Larry even showed some books. Shelby, maybe you showed some books too, where you do a standard deacidification bath, and you're like, oh no, the water's turning a little blue, and you see you're getting some color loss. Even in those instances, you're not getting color loss like this. This is something on a level
you're
where it's
not,
like, oh my
exactly.
god, how did you
Exactly. So I'm wondering if you use something very
yeah.
This
something
was-
we would recommend in the
a heavy
conservation.
surfactant that just pulled out of the
A heavy bleaching agent,
Yeah.
chloramine tea for a couple
Yeah.
hours, something like that. Another interesting backstory to this was that the centerfold was already married. And in fact, the centerfold had already been leaf cast by Kenny. So post the collector buying the book, he sent it to Mike. Mike sent it to Kenny, according to Kenny, for leaf casting. Kenny apparently leaf cast the centerfold, but not the rest of the book, sent it back to Mike, and then it suffered the rest of this fate post that. So it already had a married centerfold that had been leaf cast, then was in Mike's hands, then came back to Kenny's hands. These are pictures from Kenny with it laid out on his board to show the condition and to start aligning all the pieces for full submerged leaf cast. By the way, Kenny Sanderson of Sanderson Studios is, of course, a friend of the channel. He's featured in our book. By the way, welcome, Knights of Old, and thank you very much. We appreciate it. Our pleasure, and we're really glad it's
Knights of Old
been
should have gotten
received so well.
Yeah, I'm assuming Knights of Old, you got your book this week. He was part of the soft cover group that should have gotten all their books this week, and I'll make it we'll do an update here in a little while.
So we did a multi-page spread on Kenny Sanderson and his work and his history in the book, and he is, like I said, a friend of the channel. We've invited him to come on, and he said, "I appreciate it, but YouTube's just not my thing." So his absence here isn't a indication of anything other than, he communicates through Instagram and doesn't really want to be out there any more than that, though he did graciously provide an interview and a whole bunch of pictures for the book. And Shelby, I will highlight you.
Yep. So
there's a multi-page spread here. Do you want to flip through it?
I'll flip through it.
Ooh, look at that nice hardcover.
Nice.
It is. I ended up getting a printer's proof. So this was an amazing one. I love this.
Yep.
Oh yeah. So a lot of the images he sent to us are focused on leaf casting. It's kind of what he's known for. I think, Kenny Sanderson's arguably the best comic book conservator out there, regarded as by many as such, and not getting any arguments here. That was a double-sided leaf cast there.
Yeah.
It was a double leaf cast. It's not double-sided. What he did is he leaf casted the interior brown, or he leaf casted the exterior white first. Then on top of that, did a brown to match the interior. So it was a double leaf cast, but he didn't do it on each side. He did it on one side with the white first to match the cover. Then leaf cast on top of that in brown to match the interior.
That's a good distinction. Yeah, that's a good distinction to make. So it's double layered, but done from one side is a more proper way to say it. I appreciate that correction. Yeah, so those of you, and of course there's descriptions and everything there. Oops.
Hey.
How do we get to that layout?
Here, try this one. There we go.
Oh, no. Sorry, shall we?
Good thing I wasn't picking my nose or anything.
I'm like, yeah, well, I'm emceeing, I'm creating all the slides, I'm doing all the stuff, and I'm a boomer, so it's going to happen from time to time. Right, so here are, as I said, the befores from Kenny, and you can see some close-up images. Really, Kenny's description said threadbare, and I think those of you that have taken a piece of paper beyond its natural state can attest to this. It does feel threadbare. It feels almost like a very thin piece of cloth. Just doesn't have any stiffness to it, and rough shape. Well, here's two layout to show after leaf casting. So more or less same angle on Kenny's table, and you can see all the new cast holding together the back cover, front cover, and all the loose pieces. Wow. Far cry from what we used to do 20 years ago with tape, and even 15 years ago with Japanese paper and glue and etc. I think
the stiffness from the Japan paper and wheat paste, that's one of the distinction when I talked to Matt Nelson about it, where really they had to make the distinction in quality because it's one sheet of paper now. It's not a piece of paper that's mended with wheat paste and archival tissue. That's why it feels more natural. Everything about it is going to be more natural.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's clearly in conservation circles, leaf casting is now the accepted way to do this, as long as, cost isn't an issue, because it is labor intensive. And, they're still doing Japanese paper and wheat paste for documents where they just have to move really quickly because, conservation staff at libraries and museums are usually pretty limited. But for really important documents, this is what's being done now. This is considered the state of the art, right? Yeah. And, look, it's been around 65 years. So it's not exactly completely new tech. It's just relatively new to comic books. Yeah.
And I always like to look at very certain areas when you're doing these comparisons. So I'll give a couple of examples. One is you can see this line of something around the O and the I in action. Then you look at Kenny's and that line is gone, right? So it looks like maybe there was some moisture damage there that he was able to get removed during the cleaning process. If you notice where the N and the peak of the N and that tear, and then look at Kenny's, you can see how really nice he placed that together, but also he had to leave a little bit of a gap, right, for the leaf the pulp of the leaf cast, the furnish,
The
to
infill.
actually adhere between the two. I look at the long tear underneath comics, and then look at the precision in which that was relayed. You can see a little bit of it near the end around the C and the S, but otherwise, like near the spine, you can barely tell that that was once two pieces. The layover near the 10-cent mark, is fixed. So it's little bitty details, and there looks like there's also a layover that was near the S that is fixed too. So it's little details like this that it is the precision of the parts that make up the whole, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Of conservation, that I think is so important to point out, because sometimes we get we would get distracted by the whole, but when you look at the minute details, there's so much precision that goes in. Go ahead, Phil.
There is one early conversation I had with Kenny about it too, and you don't realize until you're trying to put 18 pieces of a cover back together on a wet suction table, if you're doing full submersion, is that once the piece is in place, it's in place. So you're really not,
it's there.
That's it. So even within this realm, and everything is so close and tight, you can see there is the human element to it, where like that corner piece of the end is like just enough to notice it's part of the necessity of how full submersion casting works. So really, for it to be that close is like, that's it. That's like a match.
Exactly. That's why Kenny wanted this. He and I talked about, having this put in the book, which is an evidence of the precision in which you have to lay out to replicate this, right? And Kenny and I talked, and he said, yes, he said that's a great idea. Put in a example to show the precision of what I had to go through, right? So you had to use these weights, lay things down, measure them out, because like Phil just said, once that process starts, it's no going back, right? And it does take a lot of skill, a lot of patience in order to do that. And that is the difference between someone with 20-something years of experience doing this and, someone like me or trying to do this. I would never attempt it.
And I did get an opportunity to spend a couple days with Kenny face to face last week. I saw 4 of his books that had been leaf casted in person, unslabbed. Was able to inspect them, feel them, look at them, and they really are the standard by which we're all working here in this little sub hobby. So great. I was honored to be able to see his work up close. Here's another angle of the same sort of before and after state on this cover. Most of the work was on this cover. And I guess I should say too, Kenny, again, this book was owned, I should say, by a longtime collector, someone who had been a customer of Mike, but also had been a customer of Kenny's. Kenny did all this work for the customer for free. Just felt really terrible about how the state of this book and how the money that he had already spent to fix it was gone. And so another shout out to Kenny, not only the standard by which we're all measured for comic book conservation, but also a heck of a nice guy.
Heck of a nice guy. And in our story of Kenny, that was something that Paul and I felt needed illuminating, was his ethics, his standards by which he thinks of comics and his business and things like that. We felt that was much more interesting a story than getting into the minutia of the technical side.
Yeah, absolutely. Another fellow who's never going to do anything other than what's right by the comic.
Exactly.
Which, is true of many of us, but not all of us.
That's Right.
as evidenced by the fact that we had our first mug shot on the show this week.
Jeez.
Here is the cover folded, or I should say kind of semi-rolled. It doesn't have the distinct seagull type shape that we see in a lot of Kenny's work at this point. But we'll see that, I think, in some of the other casts. So in addition to leaf casting the cover, which was a significant amount of work, he received the interior as well. There's that splash page, and you can see the Schuster drawing of Superman that ends up on the cover of Superman #1. And here's Kenny's process for dry cleaning. This page needs casting as well. You'll see when it's separated. It's difficult to see when it's together here with the rest of the book, but when it's separated, you'll see that it is missing some material. So he's using a document cleaning pad here, as well as some erasers. And you can see the before and after of the dry cleaning here. And he shared with us, this is the back of that first leaf. And there you can see some of the chips that are out of the book and the missing material. So here's the leaf by itself, and you can see just how much material is missing. Quite a bit, really, at the end of the day. And of course, this page was also leaf cast. For those of you that may be experimenting with leaf casting or interested in trying interior pages, I guess it may be obvious that the paper is different from the cover, but the paper is very different from the cover, and therefore requires quite a bit different approach, different techniques to leaf cast it. You'll see here, this is just the sort of simple before and after. This is another full submersion leaf cast by Kenny. And this one has this sort of characteristic upside down seagull, as I'm calling it here, that you see from a lot of Kenny's work, where he's cast it and either and early on in the process, he's gone ahead and put a fold in it prior to reassembly and trying to fold the entire book all at once.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we actually suggest in our book. Trying to maybe get your pages folded prior to trying to do a full reassembly, because they're going to want to fall in a certain way, right? They have a memory to them. Also, I want to point out too, someone could have, tried bleaching and that, right? This is a very almost sympathetic conservation, right? You're leaving those defects. You're leaving, a lot of the history and authenticity of the book there and not overdoing it. And that is something I think that you learn over time too, because I know a lot of my early conservation work, my first thought was try to get it back to white or pristine or something like that, but learning when to, stay back is very important.
Yeah. Let's roll through a couple quick comments. I think the professor said, how do we know it's the same book? For me, the biggest tell is that chunk that's out on the right-hand side of the front cover that has a very sort of distinct tear to it. But I think we talked about that a little bit. Gorilla says, can't wait to get my hard copy. He's talking about our book. They're going to ship soon. Maybe you should talk about that a little bit, Shelby.
So I'll give a quick update. I really apologize. The printer is now 2 weeks behind on getting the hardcovers out. They had I don't know what their deal was. I just don't know. And I apologize completely, but it's the printer's fault. So they should be shipping to us next week. Finally, hopefully by the end of the week-ish, I should receive them. And of course, I'll be immediately sending those out as fast as possible. And then I'll be immediately planning on going and visiting Paul and us doing all the signing and stuff like that. So just hang with us another week. I'll give you more updates as I learned of them, but hang in there with us, guys, and I apologize.
So unsigned soft covers already out. If you haven't received it already, you will soon. Unsigned hardcovers going out late next week, and then signed and inscribed copies very soon to follow.
Yep. And thank you, all of you that have sent messages. We've gotten probably about 4 or 5 messages at least from people that have already received their books telling us how wonderful we are. But no, honestly, telling us how much they enjoy the book. And that's what's important to us, is that y'all really felt like got your money's worth and really enjoy the book. So thank you, all of you, with your kind messages that you've sent to
Absolutely.
us.
And all the folks that took time to put a review on Amazon are just all absolutely glowing. Thank you. And it wouldn't hurt to do more. Vulu says, my formation aid just arrived. So speaking of folks that are either leaf casting or want to be leaf casting or will be soon. Rick, it is sort of like that, except there's no color shift. It would be all bluish, and the blues are just as gone as the others. But yeah, it's bad.
We could probably track down what was used, because the blacks wasn't strongly affected, and there was a very apparent to the reds, which tend to be the most volatile in these age books. Probably with a little research we could figure it out, but I'd probably lean towards chloramine tea or something.
Yeah. This is exactly why leaf casting is the standard. Antique paper embedded in new paper in an alkaline state with substantial support. That's why it's the standard, right?
Yeah.
And says, and it's reversible to a point. You can undo it a few times. Friend of the channel, Vanna, says, wowza.
As we've seen, actually, one of the likely things for this cover was that Mike tried to cast it himself, or did things several times to the point where the paper and the colors were coming out. And and, the paper.
He tried to do something.
Yeah.
He was, I think you said he was in over his head for sure.
Oh, for sure.
Is it ever the case where the conserver will need to trim away the wrap in order to connect parts of a leaf cast? I think rather than trim, you would overlap would be best practice. And I think actually Kenny Sanderson published a job like that just very recently on Instagram. It was a book that had, if I recall, married a cover, and CGC sent it back to him as too much overhang, so they wouldn't slab it. So he cast it with an overlap. So check that out. I think that's probably the better way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I know
you just never want to get rid of that old paper if you don't have to, right?
Yeah. Now I've looked at some of, and Phil maybe can speak to this too. I've looked at some of Susan's infill, which isn't the same as leaf casting, but fairly similar. Mm-hmm. And you go along the edge and you kind of create a little bit of a bevel. So you're not really taking away much of the paper. You're just creating an area for the new paper to stick to.
That's the way that Susan was taught through Bill Cyril, was that you're supposed to skive the edge of the paper that you're attaching the piece to. So some of my early pieces that I maybe even posted on my Instagram, if you go way back, I definitely have some photos of some books, so that's how I did it.
Absolutely. We're still over here playing with paper. Some people are in the digital age, but not us. All right. Here is another view of the first wrap. Again, full submersion leaf cast, and really beautiful job. Yeah. Obviously, it needed it.
Yeah, one thing, go back real quick to the light table, or it looks like a light table. I may be wrong. You're concerned about the thickness of your cast, but if you notice, like where the cast was not, which is the center of the page, you have the same luminance through that page as you basically do with a leaf casted part, right? And of course, as you move out to the edge, it's going to be thinner, but I think that's a good indicator of how you're kind of matching the thickness. And you really see it along this bottom of the spine, right, where you can see the light shown through the comic page itself, and then the light show through, like I said, in the same luminance in the leaf casted areas.
Yeah.
So,
I don't think this is a light table. I think it's white paper with bright lighting. But your point is well taken. Even on a bright white background, you'll see if the cast is too thin or too thick. It doesn't have the same translucency as the correct paper.
What you're getting at too is that we're looking at a piece that was full submersion. So if you're trying to just do spot casting and you were to look at that like right edge of the cast there, it would be far more like, I mean, you can do a spot cast where you can layer it very well and it can look very seamless, but I'm sure that you can tell a slight distinction between the full submersion where it's completely the same. It's not like there's not a slight over in this area you put just a little less so you can kind of feel it.
Right.
The gradient is totally the same.
Yeah. Well, and that's why the professor's work is so important with for those of us that aren't doing full submersion. If you're doing on a vacuum table or even just over a blotter, that's one of the ways to overcome that issue, is to really know the grammage, know the exact amount of pulp in your furnish, and deliver an exact volume. And that's another way to get an outcome like this, but it is a lot more time consuming as well.
Yeah.
We'll do one more here before we move on. Because Kenny does full submersion, can he measure out how much pulp to use, or does that not really come into consideration unless you do spot casting? You can, of course, measure the amount of pulp you put in the full submersion, and that's what conservators do in museum sciences and in library collections. Kenny has done it so many times,
right,
that
he is so practiced.
He's not measuring it in the same way. He knows how much he needs. So there it is. All right, let's go. Yep, this is the image we already saw before. Shelby asked me to go back one. This is the upside down seagull. Fold has already been put. And then here's the fully assembled book. So as far as I know, it was first wrap and centerfold, both leaf casts. Centerfold also married. I think this book was reassembled without a staple. And I think the thinking here was that it's not going to affect the grade at all. And
we didn't see the rest of the interior. And from what it looked like on the cover, it looked like the bottom staple blew out and there was rust migration, or very little bit of rust migration. Because I was just about to say, man, now that this is sitting back together and we saw the 0.5 conserve grade, doesn't 0.5 seem a little harsh? But maybe this is a case where just to get the book back together, we don't see what the rest of the interior looks like. So the rest of the interior could be really, really rough. And this is just salvaging what can be salvaged.
I think the 0.5. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little bit. I'm going to give an example book. 0.5 is a bit of a catch-all grade, right? So with a 0.5, you can be missing half of the cover. So either like the top half, the bottom half, the back half, the front half, right? You can also be missing literally up to half of the interior pages. You can be missing half the front cover and up to 5 wraps, I think it is. There's some formula, right? So it's a bit of a catch-all. And then the grade and what people pay for the book, really, like a coverless book versus a book missing 5 wraps, are both 0.5s. The book with the complete cover is going to demand a lot more money in the marketplace. That's even though they're both 0.5s. 0.5 really is a grade where you need to buy the book, not the grade.
Absolutely.
My thinking on this, though, Phil, I think this massive fade is limiting this book. That in the actual, missing artwork,
Can we
I
pull up
I thought that was
grader's notes? Since we
I
have
do
them,
have
since we
them.
the
Yeah,
grade?
yeah,
I'm
we have
curious, just because I know that it says the page quality is brittle. So
I'm gonna
curious
I'm
if
gonna
it's
get
like,
back to it. Let's. So my plan was to just narrate the story a little bit differently. So
oh, this
here's
is the
the
original.
transition.
Gotcha.
No, this actually isn't. This is a different book. This is the
it is,
most
yeah.
recent comp that I found. And why is this the most recent comp? As I mentioned, 0.5 is a bit of a catch-all grade, and there are some without front covers. There are some missing many chunks, many leaves in the interior. So I thought this was the closest comp that sold recently. So this sold this past year, within the last 12 months, 0.5 brittle pages. That's what the other book is going to end up as, even though you haven't seen it slabbed yet. Moderate amount of tape on cover, interior and cover and interior, incomplete book, back cover missing, front cover detached. This particular one says all pages chipping, tape top of page 1, moderate tape cover, moderate tape interior, complete spine split, detached cover, multiple piece out front cover. So this is the one that's the closest comp. So allow me just a little detour. This one sold, as I said, in the last year for $8,650. Again, 0.5 is a catch-all. I found some sales like below $2,000. I found a sale above $20,000. So this is just the most recent one that I thought was a comp. This is the value that I used. But now let's get to your question. So here's the book slabbed. Back to the book in question, right? This is Action 10, conserved 0.5, brittle pages. So I think that this is a 0.5, Phil, based on the fact that it has brittle pages and that almost all the color's gone from the cover. I think that's what's keeping it here, because think about it, it's not missing any leaves, right? Like traditionally 0.5 is missing half the cover, or multiple interior leaves, or some combination thereof. I think what held this back, and to your point, maybe that's overly harsh, but
maybe the notes here aren't comprehensive, and that the page quality being brittle means that all of the rest of the interior pages, other than the first wrap that we saw that was leaf casted, could be mostly split and brittle. So then it's like, but also I was thinking about specifically that Hulk 181 that Jerry leaf casted, and that cover, what grade did that come back at? Because that book also, just in terms of initial eye appeal,
I will look and
it was complete, but it was very faded, and there was a lot of areas where there was color touch removed. And that point. I'm pretty sure that came back like at least a 2, maybe. So a 0.5.
I thought it was a 2.5, but
for being totally
1.5.
Oh, it came back a 1.5.
A 1.5. Okay, all right. Here. Interesting. So, yeah.
1.5.
I mean, that's pretty faded. That's a pretty faded cover too.
It is, but it wasn't brittle pages, Phil.
Exactly. No, the brittle pages is what kills it. It's not just slightly brittle.
I think so.
And overall, I think if I was a grader, I would give it the 1, but maybe if I was able to totally inspect it, I'd say, nah, you know what, actually. So,
yeah.
Yeah, this is off-white pages.
Yeah. Yeah, the page quality on Jerry's project was still nice and supple. And even to Kenny's point here, this paper, even after leaf casting, Kenny said it was very brittle.
No, totally. And also I think part of it is I'm thinking about it maybe not from a purist perspective, and that is that this book then, if you didn't leaf cast it and you submitted it as is, you could argue you could get a 0.5 universal, right? I mean, unless they'd say the cover was cleaned, which, I mean, here they might.
Yeah.
It doesn't say it. It doesn't say it in the grader in the label.
Yeah,
it just says leaf casting, right? Cover, and a chip.
Well, I think when they say leaf casting, it's kind of assumed.
Yeah, not necessarily, because
I know not necessarily, but I think that's one of their inconsistencies.
For sure.
Yeah, there's only a certain, they have a software and there's only certain selections, and one will override the other, so to speak.
You know what I'm trying to articulate? What I'm trying to articulate is that in this this book state nothing was done to it, like Kenny got it and just looked at it and didn't cast it, if that state would technically be a 0.5 universal, this grade to me technically should be not a 1.5, but it should be a 1. I think that's the argument that I'm trying.
I think that's a fair argument.
Yeah.
To your point, if you just sent in a pile of crumbling paper, but if that got a 0.5, this should be higher. I agree with that. My question back is, if it was really that bad, would it be NG?
It's got to be bad. No, if it's otherwise complete and they're just really
complete, but just
quality.
really crumbling, just it's that brittle. Still,
I've never seen a
0.5
grade for something that
I haven't either.
it doesn't have the cover totally missing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Sales Boy, thank you so much. Everybody go check out Sales Boy Comics channel. Sponsoring the show next week, Sales Boy and Jason Adrift once again. Sales Boy says, live, love, laugh, peace, love, conservation, work comic book on collecting and collecting. Really appreciate it. So here we go. What do you think?
Awesome.
What do you think it sold for? So
would you think
this book sold? So we know that this book this got out of Mike's hands and over to Kenny's late last year, and it went to Comic Connect for a no reserve auction, low starting bid, and went to the highest bidder. I will tell you, it then got flipped onto eBay in the last week. So we're gonna do this twice. But any guesses for what it sold for on Comic Connect?
Remind us what the other one went for. Was it 10 grand?
It was 86.
Was that 86? Okay.
50.
86.50. That's right. Thank you.
It's not like you really have your pick of other copies.
No, you really don't. You want a copy of Superman's third cover, you got to pay whatever you got to pay, right? Yeah. The Professor's in at $4,500. Hugo Danner's at $5,600. Rick Nestor $3,750. Collecting Chaos should have went $3,751, but didn't. I suspect they put it in at the same time. I'm just goofing. AG's at $3,000. Archivist Adrift says $6,329.17. Our sponsor, Sales Boy, says $3,900. Greg says $8,000. I think it's Greg Skavorak. Ben Stewart says $7,000. Do either of you want to guess? We get to do this twice, by the way.
I still have no faith in the comic buying community to understand what's really going on here with conservation. So I'm going to say $2,000.
I'm going to say $6,300.
$6,300. That's a big gap between the two of y'all. Drum roll. 4701. Now, this was Comic Connect, and this was late last year.
Does that include the 15% buyer's premium that they sometimes do or do not include in their listings?
I'm not 100% sure about that, but I will say we shouldn't spend a lot of time on this because it just got flipped on eBay literally in the last 5 days.
Wow.
Listed or has it sold?
It's sold. There it is, sold.
Sold through.
Really?
7,000.
Yeah, and I did double check this because it was, I double checked it off of one of the sites that checks for best offers, and it was a full $6,950.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
They
81%.
They offer free shipping, though.
It was the free shipping. That's what got it.
That was what it was.
I mean,
well, all right.
Your tax is going to be over another $500, depending on where you are.
They just goes to show the scarcity of books sometimes just can create some compression between these universal and conserved and restored grades, because I bet there's not a single copy for sale of this right now that isn't either coming up for sale at Heritage or probably isn't, because it's, what was it? There was 30 copies or no more than 40 graded
20,
copies.
22 universal,
I think it's
47
44.
total. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it's
Fewer
40.
than 50.
Yeah.
Fewer than
Yeah.
50
Doesn't-
total.
40, yeah.
Doesn't really change hands often. So
Yeah. 81% is good showing for a conserved book. So who was closest to 7,000 without going over? Who do we have? Ben Stewart was at $7,000. If we were playing Prices Right,
I went for
rules, though, he went
69999.
over. So
I think
maybe
Jason went 63, 90, 29, 17.
Yeah, I was at 63, but Adrift prices rated me out.
yeah. So Ben is closest, but if we were playing Prices Right rules, it'd be Jason. Congratulations to all of our players, though.
Hey,
If someone needed, Knights of Old said, if someone needed the interior for a cover, $7,000 would be worth it. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
and then they got a complete copy that maybe can be a 2.5 conserved, or qualified if they don't mind that green label. But
Yeah, absolutely.
for sure.
Well, that's our show. That is all we have for you today. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. What do you guys think?
Me too.
I like
Sweet
taking
book.
a little bit of deep dive into looking at the, details of Kenny's work and stuff. I thought it was great.
Yeah, that one definitely had enough meat there for a full hour story. So,
Yeah.
And the saga continues, right? There's still many people with books in, as far as I understand, still in evidence locker.
So I mentioned earlier about the theft I had. So they sold the books to Richard, and luckily I had pictures of all the books because they were of a certain. It was like my Iron Man #1, #2.
Richard is our friend, the owner of
Bedrock.
Bedrock Comics
Bedrock City.
in
Yeah.
Houston.
So I had a complete list of what was stolen and pictures, and Richard had not sold all of them. He graciously offered to give them back.
Wow.
We did get the police involved, and here's the situation. If I wanted to press charges, they would go into an evidence locker, and who knows how long it would take for you to get them back.
It's going to be
Go through the wait for the trial, then you'd have to, wait on so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And they said it could be 4+ years before I ever sold the books. Or I could just not press charges, and that karma will hopefully take its, chance at some point. And since Richard was nice enough just to give everything back to me, even though he was out about $8,000, he lost about $8,000. Because what I lost $2,000 was what I paid, but then the prices had appreciated.
Sure.
Even though Richard was out about $8,000, he gave all of them back that hadn't sold. A few things had sold. The Iron Man #2 had sold. The first appearance of Captain America, was it 101 was the start of, was the actual #1 for Captain America.
Yeah, 101.
101 that had sold.
The continuation of Tales of Suspense. Last issue of Tales of Suspense is number 100.
So,
all right. Well, let's do a little wrap up here. Jason says, great show. Appreciate you. Salesboy says, come follow me. Definitely do if you're not yet. Peter says, thank you for another show. Jason says, over too soon as usual. Professor says, feel better, Captain Larry. That goes double for the rest of us. And our buddy Mike says, hey, leave a thumbs up. Appreciate you, Mike. And
can you?
yes, sir. I was about to say goodbye to everybody.
Well, I was going really quickly. I did it.
You already failed at that.
Yeah.
Accept my share. No, come on, Grandpa. Click the button that says share.
Oh my gosh.
All right. So, yeah, we have a website. So we're going to try to keep up with all of our things, Liberty Hill Press, which is Paul and I's company. If you're interested in also publishing, or you got an idea for things like a book or something, please reach out to us. We've already started doing some connections with some people that hopefully will be helping them publish some books. But this will give you a little bit of a story of the first book, also some previews as we start moving ahead with our next couple of books. So the how-to guide. Hopefully we'll be launching, I'm not sure if we're going to do a Kickstarter or not, but that should be launching somewhere around May of this coming year. And then later in the fall, we're going to do more of a comprehensive restoration, detection, and removal. And then beginning probably next year, we'll be doing a leaf casting. So yeah, definitely check out our page. And I'll be adding more things as we get to it. Haven't optimized it. There we go. So yeah, please check us out. And like I said, if you want or got an idea for something you'd like to get published, reach out to us and we will definitely work with you. That's all.
Absolutely. Awesome. I want to thank everybody for joining us, whether you joined us live or you're going to watch this on replay. Thank you so much to everybody that contributed to the live chat. Hopefully feel better soon, Captain Larry. Thank you to my co-hosts, Phil and Shelby. And I will say, till next time, take care of one another. And Shelby, why don't you sign us off?
All right. Thank you all for such a great evening. So glad we could spend a little bit of time together. Happy thoughts. And remember, peace, love, and comics. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, Jack.